Welcome back to the Upper Tier Podcast, the football podcast we bring you each and every day on the Dynamo Podcast Network. Head over to YouTube, smash that subscribe and bell notification button. Audio versions of the show you will find on Spotify or wherever you pick up audio versions of the show. You will find us there. Just search Dynamo Podcast Network and the Upper Tier. Joining me tonight, the podfather of the network. Not in his Dynamo's dozen guys, not in his Chelsea Roar guys, not in his on the slab guys, not in his flaming puck guys, but we're doing an upper tier show where we're going to have a chat, come kind of little bit of a debate maybe about Celtic and Rangers and the potential of them moving to the Premier League one day in the future. How are we doing, Ian?
A conversation since as old as probably Celtic Football Club are at this stage. I'm very well, man. I'm very well. I kind of threw this idea at you, didn't I? Because I was having a little read through of obviously David Moyes had been talking about it over the last couple of months, and a couple of prominent figures were talking about it over the last year in particular, and how it could possibly work. And also we'll go through the pros and the cons, as you say, and it could end up in a debate. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. You threw this out to us as a suggestion because, as we know, it is International Week, and
yes,
because we are such huge international fans, we felt we had so much time on our hands this week to put a few shows together. So we had a conversation this morning kind of in the car about it, a back and forth about it. It'll become very clear where we both lie on the subject as the episode goes on. So this was your suggestion, so I suppose you should kick it off.
Well, that's it. Do you know what I'll do? Before we kind of get to the debates, I've actually got a couple of pages here that I kind of wrote out as a broadcast journalist does. You know, I am in the vein of Bobby the Brain Heenan. Some people love me, some people hate me. Whichever side of the coin that you sit on. The fact is, you watch me, so learn to love it because I'm here forever.
Work for Macho Man, so why wouldn't it work for you?
Cream of the crop. So this was one concept that was actually put out that I found really interesting. And I'd be like, so we'll have a little discussion about this concept first and foremost, because it was a concept that was drawn up by some prominent figures, though we don't know who yet. But this was about a year ago. And I'm sure during the lockdown and stuff, there was probably conversations and all that were, talked about and how they could do it, especially with Celtic and Rangers being hugely supported clubs. I think that's not up for debate. And probably in theory, in terms of the marketing and the sponsorship that is brought in by the SPL, probably are too big for that league. And that's probably why that conversation comes up in terms of fan base and support. I'm sure we can both agree on that. But this was the one that stuck out to me. So this was one concept. Now, football is ever changing. So, I mean, we can shut this down and just say, no, wouldn't happen. But let's go through it first. So one was that the Premier League would have 16 teams from England, Scotland, and Wales. Now, that doesn't mean that they'd all be set in stone of what teams get there, but that would be basically the theory of it. The Division 2 then would have 22 teams from England, Scotland, and Wales. The Division 3 would have 4 regional leagues of 22 teams each, A, B, C, and D. South of England, Midlands and Wales, north of England and Scotland. So you can kind of see kind of what their thinking is behind that. Division 4 would be kind of the lowest of the low. That would be kind of where you're getting into conference, etc., where it would have 4 semi-professional divisions along the same regional lines as Division 3, and possibly including under 23 sides and stuff like that kind of had them playing man football, so to speak. And this would mean that all non-league teams would be raised at least 2 steps in the pyramid, if that makes sense, if you're with me so far.
Yep.
There would be more local derbies, and travel would be less expensive for fans. Nobody loses out. In fact, most teams are now closer than ever to the Premier League. Places in various divisions come down to football and merit. The League of Wales could be a feeder division for 4B in its own right, etc., etc. And yeah, so you can see, what do you think of that concept, just in terms of, I mean, it sure beats the Super League concept, I'll give it that, because you're keeping it local, and obviously all the cup competitions stay the same, I guess, is the reason. Now, I'd be interested to get your take on that, because I'm not saying yay or nay to that. It sounded very
Yeah, I think
Interest.
it's like you're trying to create like a United Kingdom league, really, and then it filters
Almost.
down through the pyramid, basically.
Yeah.
And we know that the Welsh teams are heavily involved in the leagues anyway, with
Yeah.
Swansea and Cardiff and Wrexham and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I suppose it could happen. I suppose where you run into a problem is at the moment, obviously you have a Welsh league board, if you like. You have the Premier League and the Championship and all that, and then you obviously have the SPL and whatever leagues associated with that. And
Except, yeah.
they all have a hand on the wallet. And the question is, if you went down that road, how do you divvy up the wallet? And that's where it really, I mean, at the end of the day, let's be honest, any changes that come into football generally either get driven by money or get talked about or thrown out on the basis of the financial pros or cons to it, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where I see, these governing bodies, let's call them, if you like. That's where you tend to find, that's where you get into a stumbling block, because no one wants to give up their hand in the poker game. As a concept, I think it would probably work, although I do believe in football at the moment there's still a lot of tribal elements there in terms of support and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, we see it already with politics, and we see it already even with monetary systems and stuff like that. We've seen the Brexit stuff and the exit from the euro and all that kind of stuff. But there's that kind of turmoil goes on internally, even in the UK. I mean, I'm a Liverpool fan, and if you've ever gone to Liverpool, Liverpool regard themselves nearly as their own little country. They don't believe they're English; they believe they're Scouse. And you have a lot of that in Scotland. Maybe not as much in Wales, but in Scotland, I know you have a lot of that, in terms of they take a lot of pride in the fact that they're Scottish. They kind of nearly try to act like an independent state, if you like, within the United Kingdom and stuff like that.
Well, they are a Celtic. They are a Celtic nation, you know what I mean?
Yes.
When we think of Ireland and Scotland, we're the Celtic brotherhood, you know what I mean? So there is that, yeah.
So I think there's those elements to it as well, in terms of how do you iron that stuff out, and what way would it work? And I think there's a number of those little stumbling blocks there. The patriotism side of it, obviously the financial.
I'm glad just to touch on that, actually. And I read a couple of I was on a couple of different forums and stuff that were talking about this, and I must say, the anti-Irish thing is still very, very prominent in a lot of fan bases, because they're not educated on it. And they feel that we're, Celtic in particular, they feel that the Celtic fans are this sectarian front of IRA supporters who hate the Queen and hate England, and they don't wear the poppy. They're the only club in the UK that don't wear the poppy. And so there's a little bit of a divide there already. Yeah. And if you're bringing Celtic into that sort of world, you're probably asking for a lot of trouble, even more so than that you would get with Celtic and Rangers, right?
Yeah, well, I come from a different standpoint, insofar as I have never really followed Scottish football, except for people that I worked with who I knew were huge Celtic fans, and they were tribal in their following of Celtic and in their hatred of Rangers, obviously, you know what I mean. But it's Scottish football, and no disrespect to Scottish football at all. I just personally have never followed it. To the latter. Now I know about the Neil Lennons and the Martin O'Neills and the Scott Browns and the Henrik Larssons and all these guys. I mean,
the first two you mentioned, I couldn't give two flying fucks about.
But you know what I mean. But you know what I mean, and I remember those guys, and obviously a lot of the Rangers guys obviously came down at times and they played for Everton and all. I think Laudrup was one of them at the time. He played for Rangers.
That's correct.
And he also played for Everton, didn't he? If I think I'm right.
No, Celtic. He went to Celtic.
Oh, he went to Celtic.
No, sorry. Apologies. Laudrup was with Chelsea.
Oh, he's with Chelsea, was he?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and there was one of their boys as well, I think, went and played for Everton as well, wasn't I? Can't remember who it was.
I don't believe so, Niall. No, I think Laudrup was with because he went to Chelsea then from Rangers, and then he got a bit home. He went from Rangers to Chelsea.
Yeah, no, I don't mean Laudrup. I mean, I think there was a couple of Rangers boys that came down. And
oh, sorry. Yeah, well, that's
not Laudrup. I just can't remember their names off the top of my head.
Well, obviously, you had what's his name? A lot of Rangers lads went to the blue side of
because obviously Walter Smith obviously was there.
Walter Smith, but then of course you had what's his name? Big striker, Scottish centre forward, mad bastard, played for Everton. What's his name? He was caretaker manager for Everton there not so long ago.
Duncan Ferguson.
He's a Rangers background. Yeah. So there was plenty of them. There was a couple obviously that went from the likes of Everton to Celtic then as well, like Steve Guppy and stuff like that. I think he played for Everton for a while, didn't he? So there's kind of a. Yeah. It's funny as well how time has evolved. There used to be a Liverpool-Celtic connection, and now it's kind of obviously with the whole. I think El Hadj Diouf almost helped break that, but then Steven Gerrard most certainly then broke that. And it was, but no, in terms of the club support, look, whatever side of the fence you sit on, that's fair enough. I kind of came from a very, I suppose, Republican area in two areas, obviously in Dublin and then in Bray, and a family that were very, very, very pro-Celtic, you know what I mean? So I grew up with the Paul McStays of this world, and then when I was kind of starting to watch football, I was always divided between three teams with Chelsea, Juventus and Celtic, but Chelsea always took priority, I'm not going to lie. But I was very, very pro-Celtic, and obviously even before Henrik Larsson and Pierre Van Hooijdonk was one of my kind of footballing heroes. And, so there was even when we look at players like, God, when you think of Larsson when he came in, who was it? Yeah, Craig Burley was a player played for Celtic, and then went from Chelsea to Celtic as well. So it was always that kind of
Now doing a great job on ESPN FC. He's out there on ESPN FC.
He loves winding people up. That lad, he loves winding people.
Makes a career of it.
like a proper Scotsman.
Yeah.
But I suppose before we get into a little bit of the history of because we're going to have that kind of debate later. When we look at the history of English football, it's easy for us to turn our nose on Scottish football and go, well, blah, blah, blah. But the English have also taken advantage of Scottish football too and called them homegrown players when it suits.
Yeah.
Because when we look at throughout the 80s and the 90s, Liverpool are one of the beneficiaries of this, as are Manchester United. All the top boys got poached by the top English clubs, taking advantage of that situation too. Look at possibly the greatest manager of all time, right? He's a Scotsman. So in terms of the football history in Scotland and the background and the upbringing of grassroots there, it was once absolutely phenomenal. And a lot of the best players, I mean, arguably one of Liverpool's best players, if not their best player, the king himself, Kenny Dalglish, who also played for Celtic. In fact, Celtic fans will know the Kenny Dalglish song, which I owned on a great CD that I bought from the Celtic shop here in Ireland years ago. Yeah. There was such a huge George Graham, one of the most successful players and managers. You know what I mean? The list is endless. We're not going to go through them all because we'd be called out for. Docherty, who managed both United and Chelsea, helped build that Venables side with George Graham.
Yeah, Liverpool have had huge links with Scottish football.
Alan Hansen, good Lord! I mean, Stevie one of the best centre backs ever to grace, English football. So yeah, I mean, there is an argument that the Scots can make that. Well, the English have been poaching us. They're like we're like the whales, in the water, and these poachers are coming and taking our kids away. And so they've always had a great kind of youth system, and it was all through the board. It was all across the board. You know what I mean? Even the likes of Aberdeen and Motherwell and Hibs, who a lot of people forget is the first Irish kind of rooted club within Scottish football. A lot of people don't realise that. So there is a lot of rich history within Scottish football connecting to to the English game. So I suppose you can see why people ask that question, can't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Apologies. I'm going to get into something real quick before we do talk about yay or nay, because it's one thing I wrote as well, because I was doing a bit of research, and I just headlined it with, will the Scottish and English club leagues ever mix? And here's one of the reasons why. So we're going to get into the logistics of how it can or can't happen. And it comes down to only if the FA and the Scottish Football Association merge. That's it. It's the only way it can happen. And the reason being, it's because UEFA have said it would need to happen for Celtic or Rangers to move to the English system. The only way it would work is if the Scottish FA and the English FA mix. And one of the questions that people are going to be asking and have asked, but why can Cardiff and Swansea? Well, that is because history, again, Wales didn't have its own fully independent structure until 1992, believe it or not. So they didn't have a structure in place. That was when obviously the League of Wales was formed. Prior to that, top Welsh clubs played in the English system, and most Welsh clubs played in a sort of Welsh system within the English system. So that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
And also produced unbelievable players.
Exactly. But they were already within the English football system, whereas Scotland had its own. Now, this is where it's going to get real interesting. This is a history lesson. So, lads, you won't get bored. If you're real football fans, you won't get bored. If you're a fan of English football, know the history, because all I ever get told is that my club has no history. Still more successful in Liverpool in the 90s, by the way. Just saying.
It's only one decade it's only 1 decade out of 13. Don't get too carried away.
Don't forget, Liverpool were the ones that turned around and said we began in 2003. So we've got you there.
It's only 1 decade out of 13. Don't get too carried
away. But you only said we started in 2003, so that's where we have you. And by the way,
I didn't say that.
Jason Cundy on that one. I didn't say that.
I actually didn't quote the 2003 this morning. I think you thought it was me.
No, but it's come from the Liverpool side of football.
No, it came from the Man United side this morning.
No, it did this morning, to be fair. Yeah, but they got the hump when Mourinho came in and usurped their supposed grandmaster. But no, in fairness, it's all banter, and that's what it's about. And I love it. 100%. So this is really where I'm going to finish up on the history side of things, and it gives us a little bit more background as to why this has never happened. So, and it goes back years. It isn't nothing to do with the Premier League. It all began in 1888, actually the year of Celtic's inception. You may recognize that this is a little piece that was written out, which I thought was really good. It all begins in 1888. You may recognize that as the beginning of the Football League, which is actually true. William McGregor, the founder of the Football League, deliberately didn't include the word English in the name of the league, as he hoped to also have Scottish, Welsh, and Irish clubs playing it. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Before this, so this is for all the little Premier League fanboys. This is interesting stuff here. I found it very interesting. Obviously, older fans like yourself, Niall, and myself, and our fellow upper tier lads will appreciate this. Before this, in 1887, the SFA had banned its member clubs from playing in the FA Cup, which may have put them off applying to join the Football League. So the offer was there then, the year before. Irish clubs last played in the FA Cup. This is interesting. Irish clubs last played in the FA Cup during the 1888-89 season. So they actually played in the FA Cup, which some people may or may not have known. I didn't personally. Did you know that?
No, but I'd imagine it was the very early rounds.
Oh, yeah, of course. But the fact that they did, to think the idea of a Shells or a Rovers or whatever Irish clubs existed back then, it's pretty incredible. And it's probably something we can look into, I suppose, after this. I think this is why this episode is interesting. The travelling back then may have prevented them from applying, which is true, because all boats and trains, no planes, remember? You know what I mean? The Welsh FA, however, never blocked their clubs from playing in the English competition. That was until the founding of the League of Wales in 1992. This was due to UEFA, not the FAW, not the Football Association of Wales. Exceptions were made for Cardiff City, Swansea, Wrexham, Newport County, Colwyn Bay, and Merthyr Town. This isn't quite the end, though. A Scottish club did compete in the English system up until 2001, 2002. And that was Gretna, if people remember correctly.
Yeah.
and they played in the Northern Premier League. They only left the English system because they applied for and were accepted into the Scottish Third Division. Whilst in the Northern Premier League, they weren't allowed to play in the Scottish Cup, though. So no Scottish clubs play in the Premier League because the Scottish Football Association wouldn't let them play in the FA Cup. And a similar threat may have been made about the Scottish football, or about the Football League. Nowadays, both UEFA and FIFA have said they won't and wouldn't allow it without the Home Nations Associations merging. So basically, in a nutshell and in layman's terms, the Scottish FA, UEFA, and FIFA, it's nothing to do with the FA, the Premier League, or the Football League. So it's nothing to do with the FA or any of the leagues themselves not allowing it. It's basically to do with the SFA and the FA merging. So basically Rangers and Celtic cannot physically move into any level of the English Football Association unless they merge. That's it.
Which probably makes sense.
And they would have to have two new teams. This is something else I heard someone say. You would have to almost kind of have to make a brand new team. Yeah, you would be defunct and you can have your stadium wherever, but they would have to leave and brand as a brand new team. So they'd have to have a stadium in London or something called the London Celtics or whatever. Rangers are the same. So yeah, it does make sense, doesn't it?
Well, it makes sense that they would all have to come, because the problem is, if you look at Celtic and Rangers are probably responsible, and I'm not too sure, don't quote me on this, I didn't check figures on it today, but I'd imagine they're responsible for 70% upwards of the revenue and the broadcasting rights that comes into that league, I would imagine.
More, I'd say, yeah.
Maybe probably more. Yeah, I mean, 70 to me is on the low side. I just didn't want to quote a figure because I don't know it. So the problem the problem is if you suck that out of there, what you're leaving behind is something that just needs, a massive promotion, a massive rebuild, a massive injection of money and all that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't make sense to just take two out and leave everything else behind, because the two that you're taking out are basically your cash cows, and
that's what we're going to talk about. So Niall, why don't we take a little pause for the cause, a little break, and we can get into it. I'm going to be on the pro side, you're going to be on the con side, and we'll see where we land.
Absolutely. And we're back from that little break to continue the discussion on Celtic and Rangers potentially moving to the Premier League and what would be the pros and the cons, the pitfalls and the upside, the highs and the lows. So, with it being your topic, fire away, tell me how you want to pitch this and how you want to go with it.
Well, I mean, to me, it's not a thing. I suppose I am a man of tradition as well, so I do like the idea of the SFA, to be honest with you. I suppose where I find it intriguing is just to see, and this is where we've had debates before, and they've got heated between ourselves, actually. I like the idea that personally, I would love to see kind of a commercial upside, for all the Scottish teams there. I do think there is some teams with history there, the likes of Aberdeen and all. I mean, don't forget, there's no Aberdeen, there's no Alex Ferguson. So I think people over in this country and the UK are quite disrespectful to Scottish football as a whole. But that's kind of like, it's kind of like the rich kids on the rich side of town laughing at the poor side. You know what I mean? Just because your team is successful at this moment of time, don't be that kind of prima donna and shit on everything else. And it tends to come from two particular teams, which I'm not going to mention because I'm not getting into that debate. But it does come from a section of fans that tend to have more money, but forget the roots of their teams. And that is real. I may as well say it. That is Man United and Liverpool. I'm not saying you do it. Some people do it as a joke, but over in this country, even, it's kind of like, well, Celtic aren't an Irish team, so that's fine. We're not saying it's an Irish team. It's a Scottish team with Irish roots. You know what I mean? And that is the facts of the matter. Whether you choose to support it for that reason or not, that's absolutely fine too. I'm not here to beat that drum.
Yeah, I suppose it's not. I suppose when you look at it from,
makes sense. No, sorry. Does that make sense? Why I'm saying that I don't like that kind of disrespect to kind of smaller, because that's the level of mentality that Irish football isn't supported as well. Because it's like, well,
I don't know whether it's a disrespect thing or whether it's just maybe a newer fan base that comes in, or someone who's less educated in football and stuff like that. But I'd imagine if you go back and you look at the Liverpool fan base and stuff like that and touch on that topic, I can't imagine the Liverpool fan base who have worked on their history and done their history and figured out the history of the club and stuff like that would be disrespectful in any way to Scottish football. I mean, Liverpool has always had huge links with Scottish football down through the years in terms of personnel. And even to this day, Stevie G is up there managing Rangers.
Yeah.
Basically at the moment, but he looks like he's on his way to Villa. But while Steven Gerrard has been up there managing Rangers, he has had a number of loan deals from Liverpool looking after him with personnel and stuff like that. So I don't know. Maybe it's elements of the fan base who don't understand.
Well, I'm not saying all. I'm not saying all. I'm saying a lot of the modern fans. That's all.
Yeah, but I suppose where that conversation and that debate comes in isn't necessarily when you talk about Scottish football as a standalone thing and they do their thing. I think it's more when you get into that conversation, you start talking about these two big teams in Scottish football potentially coming into the Premier League and stuff like that. And then you're talking about levels at which these things exist.
Well, let's get into that. But let's get into that. That's the conversation I'm willing to have. I'm willing to pitch my Celtic hat on here, and I've always said, now people always take context to steal an Eric Bischoff goal. Context is king. In no way, shape, or form am I saying in a fantasy world that if you throw those two teams into the Premier League right now, that with the current squads that they have, that they're going to compete, because they won't. In fact, they won't even compete with the Brentfords or the Norwiches. They would be championship level at best. And what I'm saying there is they'd be probably teetering on the mid-table to upper mid-table level, to be fair.
Because even the championship is so difficult.
Oh, absolutely. But I think with their academies that they have, I mean, you're looking at Arsenal captain right now, Kieran Tierney, even still to this day, Celtic are producing, Premier League level players at times. And they do get poached. I mean, you look at the kid, Billy Gilmore, there playing
Andy Robertson.
Andy Robertson, yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? So there's levels there, and they're listen, the history and the their youth and their, I suppose again, we're in a different time now, and I understand generations move on. Kids in Scotland, I mean, football is still huge in Glasgow. You know what I mean? It's still huge, but it's not that. They all grow up now with Premier League in their face. You know what I mean? Whereas like kids back then wanted to play for Celtic or Rangers, depending on which side you were on. There's still that. You know what I mean? There is still that, and the passion is still there in a lot of these old firms. I think it's only people that don't watch them that don't see it. I personally always watch an old firm, hoping that there's blood and guts, not literally, figuratively speaking. And I think where I'm going to have this debate is, I think, again, especially Irish lads, because I can only speak for Irish lads, they have this level of that, like, oh, well, Liverpool is my club, Chelsea is my club, Arsenal is my club, Man United is my club. No, they're not. You're a fan of that club. You're not a local. Do you know what I mean? You're not a local. Get that out of your head, because you can't bash the Queen or bash the English national team if you're calling that my club. And I think you know where I'm coming from with that, don't you? Like, I'll always kind of root for my boys in the English setup. I don't want England to ever win a World Cup purely because the English media, you would never hear the end of it. However, I will always hope that they do decent. You know what I mean? I think that whole thing is gone here again. This isn't that sectarian thing and all that. I'm glad that that's all kind of getting left behind, and it's more of a football and rivalry now than a religious rivalry. I think that's good. I think anyone with a brain will agree with that these days. Hating each other and some of the violence that's happened over the years just purely because of which book you prefer. You know what I mean? I'm glad that side of things is gone. But you understand where I'm coming from with that. And I'm guilty of it. We all love our club, and I call Chelsea my club. But what I'm saying is, in terms of locals, it's not your local club. So I think a lot of the looking down upon Celtic and Rangers in terms of how big a club they are. They are huge. Celtic in the United States are massive, massive. So much so that the Boston Celtics were named after them, basically. Do you know what I mean? These have a massive following. And what I'm saying is that if they did go into the English system and if it was built up over 4 to 5 years, you telling me that someone like Celtic would not be an attractive proposition for a potential buyer somewhere in the States or anywhere, you better believe that they would. You know what I mean? 100%. If Newcastle are, Celtic in particular would be. And that's where you're talking about competing. I mean, I think it would be a process if it happened, which I don't think it will ever happen. I just want to put my chips out there. So I don't think it will ever happen purely because of the logistics that we talked about. But if it did, without a shadow of a doubt, over a 5 to 10 year period, you would be looking at those clubs up there in the Premier League. Not necessarily, I'm saying, being bigger than United or Chelsea or Man, or Liverpool. Or even City at this point, but definitely there within that league, I think you would definitely be attracting some interest. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they would. I think when they come down, and no disrespect to them again, I think they would struggle to be competitive. I think you might have a situation like what you see with Norwich, where you have yo-yoing up and down between the Championship and the Premier League. But I just don't see. I think the difficulty for me is a lot of these old historical clubs who are steeped in history and fantastic history. There's no doubt about it. And they have a kind of an identity. You know what I mean? Like it's Glasgow Celtic, it's Glasgow Rangers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
You know what
that's
I mean?
True.
And I think a change like that. I wonder would it affect the fan base? Like I think if and that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking would the draw to Glasgow Celtic and Glasgow Rangers that's gone down through, decades and decades and even centuries at this stage. You know what I mean? I wonder would the fan base would that sit right with the fan base, in terms of their core identity and values, if you like.
So we go back to that local thing that I was mentioning there. And that was what I was saying. I didn't mean disrespect to anyone. I love the fact that you love your club as Liverpool. And it is your club. But you don't consider yourself a local. But when you go over there, you soak in the city and it's almost like a second home to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I just think I'm not even harping on it's not even for me, it's not even a geographical thing. I think if you're a Celtic fan, like I'm a Liverpool fan, I wear Liverpool on my sleeve. I always go to bat for Liverpool and stuff like that, even in debates and conversations and episodes and whatever else it is. We will always do that. But I think there's a certain value and a certain I don't know what you'd call it within a club that attracts you to that club that means something to you. You know what I mean? It's like nearly a cultural thing. And it's a set of values within a club. And the thing about it is, with most of the top clubs, it's kind of not that different, but there's just slightly little different things, slight little things that attract you to Chelsea or attract me to Liverpool. And I'm sure it's even stronger within the Celtic and the Rangers fan base in terms of their following is quite staunch. You know what I mean? And it is driven, if you think about it, like that rivalry, that old firm rivalry, which as far as I know is the oldest rivalry in football, as far as I know. So that there, it's quite combative, if you like, and it's kind of like a war that's been built up for years through a sporting event. And I just don't know. I think to brand Celtic as an English team, I think would strip them of all their values and their identity and everything that they are. Forget about the Irish connection. Let's just talk about the Scottish side of it. The Celtic connection, and the Celtic connection that, as you said, is in Australia, is in America. It's all around the world. I mean, like we can visit anywhere in the world and we're Irish and we're taken in and we're beloved and everywhere.
Here, I'll give you a figure here that I learned today, which I could not believe when I was actually looking it up. Right, I couldn't believe this. London has more Celtic fans in it than Wigan have Wigan fans in their own location. That just shows you how big like their fan base is. Rangers, I believe there's a town in Rangers that has a bigger following than 2 or 3 of the league own sides. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's same in the Netherlands with, I suppose, with the Protestant, following, and obviously with I suppose there was a lot of Holland players that played for Rangers as well, Michael Malls and stuff. But isn't that interesting? So I think you're right, and I think that all falls within the cultural thing within that city, no?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Within that city, but also globally, because they are a brand and it is a huge global thing. And the thing about it is, in 2021, there's no such thing as geography, really. You're never more than 2 minutes away from anything between Zoom and Skype and technology and flights and boats and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So geography really means nothing. You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing, actually. I was listening to a taxi man in Liverpool. He told us a story there that when we were over at the Brighton game, and he was saying, he was talking to us about an area where, what was it? Something to do with Rafa Benitez. He had bought a house or something like that somewhere. And he said, actually, where you're standing right now in the taxi, he says, you're probably closer to Dublin than you are to Rafa Benitez's house or something like that. It was one of those stories. And it was kind of weird, like, but it put it in, it's that story of geography, which means nothing. And you talk about, like, you're not a local, but what does local mean these days? Most people,
I know. And what I meant by that is because I fully agree with you, Niall. Listen, we are the Irish. When I see that kind of, I'm not going on a rant here, trust me. Like when I see that kind of, bullshit mentality anywhere in the world of, well, what are they doing here in our country? I hate that bullshit. At the end of the day, we are Cade Mila Falchit, 100,000 welcomes. That's what we are as Irish people. Yeah. And when we see how far we've planted our seed across the world, you know what I mean? Yeah. Well, it's incredible. So I think that multicultural thing is correct. And that's why I had to say again, anybody that thinks I'm saying Liverpool isn't your club because you're not a local, support your local club. I'm not beating that drum. All I'm saying is, some people there could easily turn around to you and say, well, Noel, you're from Greystones, Ireland. You're not, you weren't born here in Merseyside, but you're not. You're accepted within the culture. So I just want to put that out there in case people
we know nearly factually that nearly 50% of match day attendances aren't local anyway. So like
100%.
You know what I mean? So that doesn't, but it as you know,
Sandwich Brigade and United, you know what I mean? As their own greatest captain ever said.
What else? Go on. What else do you want to bring up? What other points had you got there in terms of the positivity, the pros of a potential move and stuff?
Well, like you see, to be honest with you, Niall, you kind of, I talked myself into a shoot on this one because I've done my research on it, and what you, funny enough, everything you said there, I was thinking, right, as a Celtic fan myself, I was like, would I want that culture to be taken away? And no is the answer. Do you know what I mean? So, although I like the fact and the idea of, Celtic and Rangers trying their hand in the league and seeing those big games and stuff like that, I used to love, for example, and you'll know what I'm talking about here, I used to love Champions League nights when Liverpool and Celtic would play. You know what I mean? Because I'd have so many Liverpool fans in school, and this is pre Abramovich era. I used to love those games. Like I remember when El Hadj just spat at the fan. I was like, I wanted to like grab that motherfucker on the pitch and just like beat him to the pulp. Because it was like, how could you be disrespectful? Because I was always aware of this mutual respect. Because let's be real, we talk about Anfield Champions League nights. Fucking Celtic Champions League nights are just as loud and just as audacious, and you know this yourself from seeing them live. Like they're absolutely massive. I mean,
especially when it's against English teams.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, you think of the Barcelona game when we beat them 1-0 and Tony Watt scored the winner. Like people say, who's Tony Watt? Exactly, he's playing for somewhere Motherwell now. But you remember that famous scene of Rod Stewart crying in the press box, after beating Barcelona on such a historical night.
Yeah.
But you're right. Any English team like that Celtic would play, it was just such an amazing atmosphere. I mean, you're talking. I mean, this stadium is massive. It's nearly 70,000. Celtic Park is nearly 70,000. It's absolutely humongous.
Yeah.
So I do think you're right. I talked myself into a shoe. I don't like the idea of Celtic and Rangers leaving it, because I do think there is that beautiful kind of culture behind it and that rivalry itself. I mean, imagine having one of them playing in the Championship and one in League One, or one in the Premier League and one in, you know what I mean? You're not getting that authenticity of what the rivalry was built on. Yeah. I mean, Rangers are an older club, don't forget. So it was the Irish priesthood that actually built the Celtic brand and the Celtic club for the Catholic boys or whatever to kind of play football. So
yeah, see, I look at it. There's a couple of things I looked at when I was thinking about it today, and what I did was I compared it to, say, like, remember when Wimbledon were a force in football? And remember they moved. Now, and they didn't even move out of their league. They just
Milton
moved.
Keynes,
and they became MK Dons, and they've been in various different guises at this stage. And no disrespect to any Wimbledon fans that we have on the channel or stuff like that, but they were such a powerhouse back in the day with Vinnie Jones and guys like that. And I mean, Liverpool bought a couple of players off Wimbledon, so I remember it well.
So did we. It was.
so you know what I mean? It's kind of like these moves tend not to be good. I don't think. I agree with you. You know what I mean? And then you see it even like if you were to talk to an Arsenal fan today, he'd go back to Highbury in the morning. You know what I mean? If you talk to a West Ham fan, they'd go back to Upton Park in the morning. And I think there's certain grounds out there
talk that to a Tottenham fan, they're so fickle though that they'll just be like, we got the best start even in the world, innit?
Yeah. But it's kind of like there is certain grounds out there that are enshrined in history.
Yes.
And I just don't think a move doesn't carry that history with it. And certainly Celtic Park and certainly Rangers, they have that history. And part of their history is the sacredness, if that's an even word, of those grounds and the history that was there and what came before them and who built it up and the sacrifices that they had to make and the history that they created there and all that stuff. You can't carry that with you somewhere else.
Well, look at the years. I'll give you a great example. Look at the years that Rangers were out of the Scottish League and went down to the bottom tier.
Exactly.
Celtic were pining for that. Like, even as fans, we were going. And I honestly do believe that that's what killed the commercial value of the SPL. Because you need a yin to the yang. You need a baby face and a heel.
Well, you know what I mean? You read my mind there, because that was my next point. My other point I was going to make was if both go down into the Championship, say, let's say they started in the Championship, what if one gets promoted and one doesn't? Or what if they both get promoted into the Premier League, and what if one gets relegated and one doesn't?
They need each other. I mean?
So it's like I don't know. It's kind of like the couple that lived together forever, didn't they? But they didn't truly love each other. You know that it was a marriage.
And when you're gone,
it was a marriage. It was a marriage of convenience. Like when you see a pendulum on a desk with the balls, and that's what it reminds me of. So you need them on this side and you need them on this side. But if they're missing on this side, it kind of doesn't work. It just swings freely, and that's why I was saying to you, like,
that's a great example. I'm just thinking of a little lonely Celtic fan sitting there swinging harmlessly, going.
Yeah, but you seen it for the years that Rangers was out of that league. It was like, there was nearly Celtic fans sitting there going, please, can we draw Rangers in the cups? You know what I mean? Because
that's true. And then it did happen one time, and it was like they hammered them 4-0, I think it was, but it was like, I'm sure just that, like, I suppose a awokenness within them came and went, we got them in the cup. It's kind of like when you look at those boys that used to just love fighting back in the 80s and be like, Chelsea fans, please draw Millwall. Please draw Millwall.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, yeah, we got Millwall. You're like,
Yeah.
if that's what makes you fucking, pick them.
This is William Wallace stuff. This is you're standing at the top of the hill ready for battle. And when you come over the top of the hill ready to go, if there's no one at the bottom of the hill to have the battle with, then what's the point? You know what
exactly.
I mean? And that's how I was looking at it as well. And I was thinking, in terms of that being an actual thing that could happen, that's a real thing that could happen in terms of relegations and promotions and stuff like that, because they're not going to mimic each other. It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? And we see it even in our own situations there. Like, look, there's no love lost between me and Everton Football Club, but I kind of wouldn't want them to get relegated.
Well, that's it. Well, it's the same with me. Like, look at me as a Chelsea fan.
Yeah.
Like, I grew up, even though we're like complete opposite ends of, England, Leeds being up in kind of Manchester area. When they got relegated, like, I grew up on that Leeds-Chelsea rivalry, and that was a rivalry stemming from the 1970 FA Cup final. See, once again, Chelsea were in the 1970 FA Cup final against the Charltons, believe it or not. Billy Bremner and all those. So, we have history. I just want to be a dick.
John Giles was probably in that team, was he?
John Giles was there. John Giles certainly didn't get up and throw a slap at Chopper Harris the way he did Kevin Keegan that day. Trust me. Fucking quite the opposite. Yeah. No, but all joking aside, like, my dad had told me about that rivalry, and it was the same way I knew about these Celtic Rangers rivalries. And I remember, like, when Leeds went, it was kind of like, Jesus, I wish there was a little bit of that Leeds and Chelsea rivalry going on. Yeah. And even now, it's like, it's not. It's like, even though Leeds are back, it's like when you play them, it's like, all right, it's still a big deal now. You know what I mean? Yep. But I'm glad they're back, and I don't want them relegated. You know what I mean? It's the same way. I would laugh at Spurs if they got relegated. It would never happen, but say I would laugh at it. But then I'd be like, oh wait, but we kind of need them, don't we?
It creates this void in your season that you feed off.
Yeah.
And that would be one of my overriding concerns.
Well, I think we're both in agreement as we close up, aren't we? We are both in agreement, and I think looking at the whole kind of when I done my research on this one, and you can tell I did, I kind of was like, do you know what? Let's take away the little fantasy kind of idea of it, and take away the FIFA-ness of it, and just kind of look at it for what it is. And I think you're right. I think that city of Glasgow, which is just such a great city, by the way, it needs that. You know what I mean? That's one of the things that keeps it going. I mean, imagine, as you said, like, the amount, I'd say, of people that travel to Glasgow for one of those old firms. I mean, you can never get a ticket anyway, even when the commercial value of the SPL isn't. I know some diehard Celtic fans that were over every other week, that could never get a ticket for that game. So, like, that kind of tells you, all you need to know about what that means to both fan bases. Yeah.
They're the only things I looked at, plus the potential attraction of players and stuff like that. Would they see it as a viable attraction in reality? And then the only other thing I looked at was the loss of revenue in terms of giving up your European spots, because Rangers and Celtic every year are nearly nailed onto a European spot. Whereas if they come down into those leagues, I mean, the chances of Rangers or Celtic making top 6 in the Premier League or winning one of the cups would be a stretch in my eyes.
The only thing I would say, I think UEFA, and this is kind of a little bit of a fucking really annoying for me. Like, I think I heard Gary Neville talk about it a while back, and I agree with him. I think he was saying, like, you need the likes of Celtic and Rangers and these sort of clubs in your Champions League groups. Even if they don't make it, they make for big games. If Celtic or Rangers get drawn with one of the English clubs, it's always a big fucking game. And UEFA now have made it so difficult for those two clubs to get into Europe. Now, I'll be honest with you, Celtic have shit the bed a couple of times, playing ridiculous teams and not one, and you're going, my God, what is this? But I do honestly believe that there shouldn't be, if you're the champions of Scotland, you should be in the fucking league, because they have some of these absolutely useless teams that get into these spots in the Champions League now in group stages. I heard Jason Cundy and somebody debate this on TalkSport, and Cundy said it as well. They should be just, if you win the Scottish League, you should be in the fucking Champions League. That's it. You're in the group stages. This 2 playoff rounds and all when you're playing like, Lech Poznan in Poland and all. You're like, who the fuck are these? I thought that was a beer. No offense to Lech Poznan fans. I know we've got a big Polish.
Well, I suppose they do have a ranking system and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And the thing I'd say about the ranking system is generally it's quite fair because they only have so many spaces open. So generally when you're going into the qualifying stages and stuff like that, you're generally being drawn against teams generally of a similar standard, and then it comes.
No, I agree. But what I'm giving out about is how ridiculous that the Champions League have made it so commercialized that like you're given. It's called the Champions League. That's what it's called. You know what I mean? I did prefer the old way, like where we'd be top 3. We'll get qualification from all the top leagues in Europe. They've just made it so ridiculous now. And there's enough spaces now that they've made it bigger that if you are the champions of Scotland or you are the champions of whatever league in Europe, it's a fucking instant. You're in.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm saying this for Rangers now. Rangers should be in because they won it under Gerrard. They should just automatically go through. And then, say, for example, Celtic can finish second. Then they go through that system. Do you know what I mean? Because the top 2, like Rangers and Celtic both basically get the same treatment. So say, I'll give you a good example, and this goes for other leagues in Europe too, like in Denmark and in Sweden and
wherever.
It's not just Rangers and Celtic.
Yeah.
But if you're a Rangers, right, you're at the hammering Celtic in the league last year, but you got to go through the same tiered system of playoff rounds to get into the Champions League. But you're the champion of your league, and you're one of the biggest clubs out there. You should automatically get into there. But no, the big clubs now, within all the top 4, kind of our 5 elite leagues in Europe, get priority, which I think is wrong. You know what I mean? And that's where the commercial comes in, because it's like, well, what does the fan want to see? Well, I personally would want to see Rangers versus Liverpool rather than Atalanta versus Villarreal.
But you're sitting from a local seat. Like if you're a Spanish fan, it's a different conversation. If you're an Italian fan, it's a different conversation. You know what I mean?
But again, this is where the money has been taken away from the Scottish League as well, because that commercial value that used to be brought in by a Celtic and Rangers, always been in the Champions League, has also kind of, I think, helped bring the value of the SPL down a little bit. But I think if you are the champion of your league within Europe, you should automatically go through. I think that should be non-debatable. That's just my own personal opinion.
Yeah, no, and it's one to be spoken about. But I think it's like the conversation that you're having there is it's not overly dissimilar to the conversations about the ESL and stuff like that. No, you know what I mean? It's why there's a downfall in that as well, and not so much of an upside and stuff that, because it has to be open to everyone and stuff like that. But I mean, I suppose it is a massive commercial entity and stuff like that, and I suppose it is structured in a way to favor those bigger teams getting into the latter stages of it and stuff like that. But the problem is, they're the teams that draw in the commercial value that pays for football as we know it today. You know what I mean? It's not that much different. I agree. In the Premier League.
Let me hit you with a rebuttal to that there. So say, for example, when it does happen that a Celtic or a Rangers loses to Lech Poznan,
whoever,
the poor Polish lads are going to be like, why are you fucking picking on my team? Sorry, it's just because...
Yeah, well, no, whoever it is, we know who you're talking about.
Whoever it is, right?
Yeah.
The commercial revenue goes down automatically when that team goes in ahead of a Celtic or Rangers anyway, because the TV value of, say, a Celtic meeting Liverpool or meeting Man United or a Rangers meeting at Chelsea or whoever, like, it goes down because Lech Poznan or Malmo or whatever team we're talking about, those games aren't going to bring in as many viewers anyway. So by having one of Celtic or Rangers being the fucking, champion, don't forget, these ratings are brought on international as well. That's not brought on.
Yeah, but that's only, but a lot of what you're talking about there is only based on viewership. Remember, the broadcasting rights are agreed beforehand.
Oh
So
no, I know that.
the values are set in stone in terms of the commercial value, but in terms of the size of the viewer base on a given
the
night,
networks.
yeah. But I mean, that's why they structure it in such a way that they want the Liverpools and the Chelseas and the Man Uniteds and all to be in the latter stages, along with the Juventuses and the Bayern Munichs, Barcelonas, Real Madrids, PSGs, and all that. It's that commercial entity. That's why they structure it that way. Everyone else, generally speaking, unless you get maybe one tournament in every 20 years or something like that, everyone else is just taking part. And then they know that it's going to come down to 8 teams.
Well, then, what's really the depth of some of these leagues? What's really the depth of some of these leagues? It's but
you got to remember as well, some of the elements of that commercial, remember, filters down into those leagues as well. As much as at times we have a disdain for FIFA and UEFA and stuff like that, there is a certain element of financial backing that comes down. I mean, if you look in COVID times where a lot of these leagues were really struggling, they had bailout plans for stuff for them and financial assistance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm the first one to stand here with a hammer in court and beat up some of these organizations. But there is a certain element, there is a financial structure there that allows.
There's no point in crying that you've given a little bit to charity while you've taken most of it away. Like, let's be real here. Do you know what I mean?
Well, some of it you haven't taken away because some of it wasn't there in the first place.
Well, you have.
I'm not talking about Celtic and Rangers now. Don't get me wrong, but I mean in general.
No, that's what I'm talking about in general too. You have taken it away because you've structured it in a way that only the strong survive. You actually haven't given a chance.
Well, not necessarily, because that's why if you look at it this year, we do get the Malmos in there, we do get the Sheriffs in there, we do get young boys, we do get that. I won't say lower level teams, but you know what I mean. Qualifying teams do go in there, so it is quite a playing field in there, and it is kind of whether you're good enough or not. And we know between Celtic and Rangers, we know there's been a certain drop off there in terms of quality. Celtic is not the Celtic that we knew and we grew
because
up
they
on.
don't
That was
have,
a powerhouse.
they can't attract the players financially, of course, because that financial power that they used to be able to attract players like Chris Sutton.
But the reality of that is that would exist for Malmo as well, and it would exist for young boys, and it would exist for Sheriff. But what we do love is when Sheriff rock up on a night and they beat Real Madrid. That's the beauty and the romance of the tournament at times. But Sheriff are no different to Celtic and stuff like that. Well, it is, because that's what, if you think about it in a given week, we'll go out in a given week and we look at Champions League fixtures and we will say, okay, well, I know Chelsea are going to beat Malmo, generally speaking. I know Liverpool will go out and we have a different group this year because it's slightly more competitive, if you like. But I wouldn't expect Sheriff to rock up and beat Real Madrid. I wouldn't expect young boys to overturn Man United. So when that happens, it kind of gives you a little bit of romance of the European League. But if those teams are there on merit because they've had to come through the same qualifying system. And is Sheriff any better than Celtic? Is Sheriff any better than Rangers in reality? Probably not, but they showed it in the qualifying stages and they've taken their seat at the table this year. So the onus is then on Celtic.
No, but this is where I'm saying that on merit, you're talking about merit quite a bit. Well, then on merit, if you're the champions of your league, you should get in. That's it.
But the problem is, because of the structure, you can't include every single league that's out there because you don't have the spacing for that.
No, but within Europe, I'm talking, if you're talking about the top leagues, all of the top leagues that are professional, there's plenty of kind of leagues that are,
well, any league in that circle is professional.
Yeah. So they should automatically get in. Like, why is the, like, for example, I do believe now, because I'm gonna hit you with this, and you're gonna tell me I know your answer. Why is anyone bar, say, the top 2 of England, the top 2 of Spain, the top 2 of Italy getting by ahead of the champions of said group of different countries? Why is that?
Well, it's commercial. It's money. Yeah, absolutely. But my counter argument to that is,
so it's not the Champions League then. So just call it the European League.
Yeah, but that's my counter argument to that is, why is anyone getting in bar the top team? Because it is the Champions League.
Well, so I agree,
and that's how it used to be. That's when it was the European Cup. But the reality is now it's become this massive commercial entity, and that's why it pans out the way it does. And it's a slightly different conversation to Celtic and Rangers and stuff like that.
It is, but it was interesting. It is interesting that we got there, because I suppose it stemmed from the fact that we kind of look at that and we kind of, because of our side of the pond and what we grew up watching, we did like the idea of meeting the Celtic and the Rangers with our teams or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's familiar to us, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the argument holds well even for Shamrock Rovers or whoever wins the Irish League. You know what I mean? The League of Ireland. You know what I mean? So it's the same argument no matter where you go. And the problem is these teams are given that opportunity through a qualifying stage, because you can't really treat, if you're looking at it not only from a commercial entity but even from a footballing point of view, you can't really, and no disrespect to Shamrock Rovers either, you can't treat them the same as a Juventus or a Bayern Munich or a, you know what I mean, in reality, you know what I mean? Because what happens is you just have teams going out there getting absolutely slapped up all the time, you know what I mean? And I don't know whether that benefits them in any way either, you know what I mean? Whereas if you look at, say, a Shamrock Rovers who might go into a Europa League or might go into a Europa Conference or whatever it is, and they might get through a couple of rounds of that and stuff like that, commercially, that's probably worth more to them than going into a Champions League and getting slapped up in your first game.
Yeah, but then when you look at a Tottenham, say, who have never won a fucking trophy in recent years, bar 2004, and they're in the Champions League final, you're going, like, this is a cup team going in, and they're only in there based on dollar value.
Yeah,
but
that's the same for everyone underneath the winners of the league.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a traditionalist, and I don't like the idea of, you know, like, I don't. Maybe it boils down to, I suppose it does all boil down to FIFA rankings and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And I think those FIFA rankings personally are worth the shit.
Well, the problem you have is a lot of these teams that are there now that get spoken about, they haven't got the history in relation to the rankings because they're quite new, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's a problem as well. Like if you think, like just think of PSG. How new are PSG?
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Well, look, we can wrap up on that, to be fair. I do. I think we're both kind of in agreement.
Yeah.
Let's keep the Glasgow clubs in Scotland.
Let's keep them modest. Yeah. Let's keep it all tribal, because that way we enjoy it more.
Exactly.
Well, listen, it's been a pleasure and a discussion on this, especially in International Week, when we boggle our minds to think about ideas of stuff that we want to talk about on episodes and stuff like that. And look,
hopefully we didn't bore people too much. As I said, it was just an interesting conversation.
Yeah. And if you're out there and you're viewing it, give us your thoughts on it and stuff like that. I'm firmly, as well as yourself, stay Scottish. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
But until next time, Dynamo Podcast Network on YouTube for the videos, Spotify for audio versions of the show. If you'd like to contact the show, we're on Twitter at @the_upper_tier. Let us know, Rangers and Celtic fans, what you think. I know the answer already. You're going to stay where you are and love every minute of it. Till next time, Ian, a pleasure.
As always, my brother.